These two movies constitute the single greatest science fiction epic movie achievement of all time.
So conservatives understanding just media in general is always an interesting thing to discuss, whether that be the cyberpunk genre, whether that just be like general entertainment. And now it also comes once again to Dune. Now, Dune Part II is out. I've seen it. I really liked it. I'll give my thoughts in a bit. But basically, there was some worries from conservatives that the first film would be very woke, and they were happy to report that it in fact wasn't woke. I wonder how anti-SJWs are feeling about Dune in the run-up to the film. Oh look, geeks and gamers, bad news. Dune goes woke. Yellow Flash 2. Dune trailer has woke Twitter furious. Wants reshoots immediately. Time to cancel Dune. Dune movie goes full woke. Insult Frank Herbert's legacy.
Obviously, there was some controversy about a year ago. I covered here on the channel about it potentially going woke. I'm here to tell you that I loved this movie. I was blown away by this movie. I did say that I reported this back in 2020. You know, bad news, Dune goes woke. That did not happen at all. Then I did kind of make a follow-up to that, say, wrong, Dune not going woke. Dune not going woke. Dune not going woke.
And now Part 2 has come out, and again, it's not woke either. And I just find this so funny because these people live and breathe the culture war, where they see wokeness, leftism behind everything. We're seeing that right now with gaming and diversity. But somehow this movie franchise isn't woke. And I think it speaks to a lot of things, because we understand wokeness kind of from the conservative perspective of being about like identity politics in some ways. But then a lot of the times it also translates to political messaging from the left-wing perspective, whether that be about race, you know, colonialism, or the economic system, capitalism, right? We see a lot of conservatives talk about woke indoctrination if you ever consume media which criticizes these systems. And here we have two movies that very much do that, inspired by anti-colonial Islamic revolution in like the 1940s, 50s and 60s and even earlier. And apparently this is a film that doesn't have any left-wing sensibilities. And most movie reviews I've watched from the likes of Ben Shapiro, The Critical Drinker, Nerdrotic, people who can't stop banging on about how wokeness is destroying Hollywood, they all love this movie. And when they talk about something political in the movie, it has nothing to do with what you're seeing on screen. Fundamentally proving my point that conservatives don't understand subtext at all, because one of the Fremen leaders, Stilgar, doesn't look at the camera saying, and this is to disrupt the flow of commerce and wealth to the empire by attacking the spice mining facilities, which means we're attacking capitalism. Apparently there is no like anti-imperialist or capitalist subtext here. And I want to talk about that because basically what we have here is someone like Frank Herbert, who is very weird in his politics. I wouldn't describe him as a leftist at all. But then you have someone like Denis Villeneuve, who is a leftist, and was even going to make a film about Palestine about a decade ago, and says Dune Part 1 is about capitalism. And these guys don't really have a problem with him. I do want to talk about one part though, because some conservative YouTubers have caught on that maybe this really good movie also is pushing a woke message. The woke message is something about feminism with Zendaya's portrayal of Chani. I'm not joking, that is the only criticism they have of the movie's politics. So yeah, I want to talk about all of that today because I just find it absolutely bizarre that, especially during what's happening with Israel and Palestine right now, we're seeing a movie which is pretty like unambiguous about which side in the context of this movie is the good guys. We're watching space Muslims running around with RPGs, like shooting at colonialist, spice mining like machines. Apparently that is just not political at all. It like absolutely blows my mind that people like Ben Shapiro, who are just insanely bigoted against Muslims, like really love this movie. But anyway, all of that coming up for you today. But yeah, check out my Patreon if you want to support my work. And I've actually been having a break of Twitter, and I'm going to make a video about this. I don't know when I'm going to be back on it, but I have been using Threads and Blue Sky as a substitute. So check me out on there and check out my travel Instagram. But yeah, let's talk about Dune Part 2. Now, I wasn't massive on Dune Part 1. Like, I did really like it, but I never watched it again. I only watched it again on Saturday before I saw Part 2. And I really liked it once I watched it again. Really appreciated it a lot more. And then Part 2, like, I sat at the front row, basically, of an IMAX theatre. The sound of this movie was incredible. Like, my whole body was vibrating. And I'm going to be talking about spoilers in this video, so please click off now if you don't want me to spoil anything. But that worm ride scene was just so, like, great. Like, such an amazing experience. Like, I saw Blade Runner in IMAX as well, and I saw Dune Part 1 in IMAX. But this movie just took it to, like, a whole new level. Like, politically, I didn't find it as interesting. But in terms of, like, the visual spectacle, like, there's really nothing like it. And it actually makes me sad. I wish Star Wars could be more like this. I know, like, Star Wars, the original, did take a lot from the books of Dune. But at the same time, something like Andor is really the closest we're going to get to something like this. So, yeah, I really liked it. And also, Austin Butler, like, was so good in this. He's so surprising in terms of all I knew him for was Disney Channel and, like, Nickelodeon. And now he's, like, playing these major roles. Like, really like his character. And that fight at the end, like, it's so good. I love the fight scenes in this, especially the one-on-one fight scenes. So intimate, just feel, like, so brutal. And I think Timothée Chalamet did, like, such a good job. Like, those two scenes when he's, like, convincing the Fremen that he is the Mahdi, basically. And then that scene with him and the Emperor at the end. Like, I really, really bought into it. It got me pumped. Like, I believed in the Mahdi myself. I was going to go along with whatever Paul wanted me to do, because that's how good his performance was. Like, he did really, in the moment, convince me, like, I want to follow this guy. And that's a sign of a good actor, if he's convincing me, like, I'm one of the Fremen. So overall, like, really enjoyed this one. Nothing's ever going to top Blade Runner 2049 for me. But I think these movies are just, like, you know, so good. And with Oppenheimer as well, another movie which apparently isn't woke either, I do like just these huge visual spectacles that are, like, nearly 3 hours long, like, being really well received at the box office, especially when, like, Marvel is dying and the DCEU, like, basically died. Like, it's a good sign for cinema that these two movies are, like, dominating and doing really well. Now, I actually do have a fair bit of criticism in terms of, like, my views on Orientalism towards both these movies. I'm probably going to make this video anyway, but I want to make a video comparing Dune Part II, Assassin's Creed Mirage, the depiction of, like, Islam and Arabs in, like, the context of Israel-Palestine, especially because both of these things have come out since October. And I just want to talk about, like, what they both, like, represent, the depiction of Islamic cultures during an absolutely, like, huge surge of Islamophobia, especially when these are, like, both very popular entertainment products. And, like, what does that say about us that we can consume these things, which take so much from Islamic history and at the same time have insane prejudices and dehumanize Muslims? That is probably for a whole separate video, but again, if you want to see that, let me know. I'll probably make it anyway, but it would just be nice to gauge the interest. So I talked a lot about the Islamic influence on Dune before, you know, the whole thing about the Mahdi, that's just, like, ripped straight from Islam. Even the Long Live the Fighters thing, that's from, like, the Algerian Revolution, and you hear it in films like Battle of Algiers, which I'm sure Denis is a fan of. Like, everyone who loves film loves that movie, and of course, the themes of that film fit very nicely into this movie as well, about insurgency, about revolution, about what that actually looks like in reality. And, you know, stuff with the Mahdi as well is, like, a callback in my mind probably to, like, the Sudanese revolution in the 1880s against the British, and it had this Mahdi figure. But, you know, there's been lots of Mahdis in Islam throughout the ages, so it could be anything. And in that, I just find it so interesting that this is all just so deeply ingrained in basically the battles between anti-colonial Islamic movements and European colonialism, because the Harkonnen and Atreides are both in the lore descended from, like, Europeans, I think. Like, the Harkonnen are Finnish, and Atreides, because, you know, it's like son of Atreus or something, they're descended from Greeks. So it's so clear in my mind when you're watching this what you're seeing on screen. And also in the book, it's like this whole corporation is doing the spice mining, which each house, like, control when they're there. Spice is oil. Arrakis is, like, a country in the Middle East. The political subtext is, like, very, very apparent. And especially if you're a culture war warrior who just lives and breathes politics, like Ben Shapiro, how you don't realize this movie is saying something about this just blows my mind. But don't worry, Shapiro does actually have political takes. With Dune Part 1, he said the Harkonnen were, like, the Soviet Union. Don't know where he got that from. But in Dune Part 2, he doesn't really talk about the politics, but he does say the movie is pro-life because Jessica is pregnant with Paul's sister and it talks to them both. So that means the movie is pro-life, and that's basically the only political messaging.
Now, because they're trying to play up the conflict within Paul Atreides about whether to become this prophetic figure or not, that is turned into a broader conversation about whether religion is itself a myth, or whether religion is a manipulative tool, or whether religion is a reality. Okay, other political things, there's one political thing that they don't even know that they're doing, which this happens a lot to Denis Villeneuve. His movies turn out to be shockingly pro-life. In this movie, because Lady Jessica is pregnant, Lady Jessica is talking to the fetus the entire movie. They show the baby in utero. Like, that is not a cluster of cells. That is an actual character in the film. In any case, everything is being set up for part 3. And apparently there's going to be now like a 2 to 3 year delay between this movie and the next movie. So it's very much like Lord of the Rings. They're going to wait to see how this one does. It's going to make all the money. The best thing about Denis Villeneuve or Christopher Nolan, the best working directors today, is that they put on the screen all the money. So as a piece of world building, it's the best world building that I've seen since Lord of the Rings. Overall, 5 out of 5 stars, really good movie, really interesting movie. And again, if they don't end up making a part 3, it will live on its own as a fulsome film experience.
I've probably showed you a little bit of Ben Shapiro's review there. He puts loads of like the Hans Zimmer soundtrack and scenes from the movie. So I don't know how much I can actually show you of that without getting a copyright claim. But yeah, go watch that. He does sincerely say that the political message of the movie is it's pro-life. Reminds me of people who said the main political theme of Death Stranding was it being pro-life because of the character of BB. Pretty bland movie review there. But he does say it's like one of the greatest sci-fi films of all time. And again, think of all the stuff Ben Shapiro has said about different movies. The Batman is anti-white because Catwoman makes one comment about rich white billionaires, right? This is the level of political analysis we get, but this is how much they see politics everywhere. That is scathing anti-white racism, but there's nothing with the Fremen and Islam and Islamic Revolution in the Dune movies worth commenting on from a guy who gets from the Batman movie that it's anti-white, right? Obviously, with Ben Shapiro, I don't know. It could be two things. He's basically not commenting on this because he wants to be seen as cool for liking this movie, or just like a lot of conservatives, as we're going to see, they don't understand the subtext or history at all because they're idiots and they don't actually read about any of this stuff, so it just goes completely over their head. I don't think Star Wars is as political as Dune, but they basically view it like Star Wars. They view Paul Atreides as Luke Skywalker, and there's just like nothing to it really apart from a hero's journey, like you're watching a movie about Link from The Legend of Zelda or something, right? They don't read the subtext of what's going on screen. It's literally like A to B plot to them. I've always said this. They just view it as an A to B narrative. If it's not said in the movie, it's not a political message at all, which I do find weird considering the pro-life thing isn't really said either. But I have a couple more reviews, and I don't really want to play too much of them, but they all pretty much agree with Ben Shapiro. Like, you have Nerdrotic here, which, you know, he also talks about how much he likes the movie and everything. He does talk a little bit about how there's not really any woke politics in it. Again, I find funny. But there is one video I might play for you here, and it's from a YouTuber called Midnight's Edge. And he does say something interesting in that he's saying they're basically forcing an agenda into this movie, right? So it's a good movie, he's not denying that, but it has woke elements to it. So when he said that, I'm like, oh, he actually realizes what the movie's actually about. He's not like the other ones who think it's all like apolitical or something like that. But then, of course, when I'm watching it, he doesn't actually talk about the Islamic influence, the anti-colonialism, the anti-capitalism. No, it's actually something about wokeness because of Zendaya.
To illustrate my point, I'm reminded of a clip that Yellow Flash alerted me to, where a game developer said the quiet part out loud.
Give people stuff you know they want, so you can inject things that maybe they aren't familiar with or maybe they don't know they want, but make them like that stuff.
I feel that's what happened in this movie. Where the likes of Sweet Baby Inc. and others failed miserably at giving the audience something great with which to swallow down that bitter messaging pill, Denis Villeneuve actually succeeded at doing that. So, what am I talking about? Here, expectations are subverted, because since its current year, this Chani is written as an egocentrical, entitled bitch who is incapable of seeing the bigger picture. Yeah, the other great houses won't accept Paul anyway, but she doesn't know that at this time. All she knows is that her boyfriend is about to become the savior of her people, giving them what they always dreamed of. He's about to change all their lives, and he's gonna do it all while staying at her side. But as a formality to seal the deal, he's gonna have to enter a political alliance, in adherence with a tradition that dates back to before their planets were even inhabited. Yet, the way this iteration of Chani has been written, that's a bridge too far, so she storms off, like the entitled Gen Z brats she must have been modeled after would. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a deleted scene of her filming a TikTok meltdown for victimhood brownie points.
So yeah, conservatives not understanding like any message in film is what this video should be called, because he thinks Chani's character arc is to subvert expectations because it's current year woke feminist, right? She only does what she does because they want to put in some sort of like girl power message into the film. Not that, if you actually watch the movie, Chani and the Northern Fremen, and the younger ones in particular, don't care for the religion, and she specifically says this religion has been fed to them to manipulate them. What her problem isn't that Paul is going to liberate the Fremen. He's leading them into galactic war with every other single house, right? So loads of Fremen are going to die conquering the galaxy for Paul Atreides, not freeing and governing Arrakis. That's what she cares about. She cares about Arrakis. She cares about freeing the Fremen from colonial control, which includes from groups like House Atreides. She doesn't want to go on a galactic war against loads of other houses just to restore Paul or to make him actually emperor of the universe, right? That's the message that it's subverted, because in the book and the David Lynch film, Chani kind of goes along with it. She isn't rejecting Paul because Paul was getting married to the Emperor's daughter. She's rejecting Paul because he's not the saviour of the Fremen. He might even lead them to ruin by sending them off around the galaxy to fight wars just for him, with the promise of some sort of paradise, because the whole message of the film is Paul is bad for manipulating them and using this fake religion to manipulate these people to do his bidding, to restore his own power of House Atreides, but also become the emperor, right? That's the message of the film. And the director did something interesting by using Chani to illustrate this point, and that's why you have all the other stuff in the movie where she talks about the religion and she doesn't like Paul manipulating the Fremen to do this, and then at the end she just rejects Paul for this. Not because of woke feminism and Chani must be shown to be like this girl boss, it's just contrasting her with Stilgar and Gurney Halleck, Gurney being happy to use the Fremen to restore House Atreides, and Stilgar like actually really believing this prophecy and believes if they follow him, they will, you know, restore Arrakis to its previous paradise, which is hinted at that Arrakis used to be a place with lots of ocean and everything like that, and they were going to actually terraform it before they discovered that spice was so valuable and could power starships and stuff. So yeah, conservatives completely oblivious to the woke messaging, and the problems they have with supposed wokeness are just them not understanding the film properly, where they think the only reason they made Chani act like this because of some sort of woke feminism. And I was actually browsing Reddit, seeing, you know, if there was any like woke backlash to the movie, but it's just lots of people saying the movie's not woke at all. Now, I did find a post on Men's Right, which was saying the not too subtle woke messaging in Dune Part II. So I thought, okay, maybe someone's going to talk about like the anti-capitalism stuff, but no, it's not about that. It's really about like women and race swapping, and about Chani saying men and women are equal. So yeah, again, like I said, there wasn't too much woke backlash to the film, but the problems they had are just like absolute nonsense and make no sense. And again, because conservatives don't do subtext. So yeah, conservatives not understanding this stuff is amazing. But you might be saying, well, Kavernacle, you're just like an insane leftist. You just read politics where they don't exist. Like, I mean, you know, visually, I think the film's very political, both of them. I think it's very hard to miss the anti-colonialism in it. Like I said, I don't think the Fremen fight against the Harkonnen is framed in any way like they're doing bad things, because it very much isn't. And you also have the Harkonnen, like, actually doing terrible things to them, you know, destroying the northern Fremen settlements where they have to flee south. That obviously feels like quite on the nose right now, because that is literally what Israel did to Gaza. And I even said that in my original video about this. You can easily read into the Fremen versus the Harkonnen, Palestine fighting Israelis. It very much fits into, you know, anti-colonial revolution. So I know some conservatives will be watching this being like, oh, Frank Herbert, he was conservative, so the movie's conservative. But again, it plays into the fundamental point about what wokeness is. Is Islamic revolution against colonialism inherently like woke? Is it left-leaning? Not inherently. Have there been left-leaning Islamic revolutions? Yeah, of course. Stuff like Algeria is a good example. Or even like less Islamist revolutions in like Iraq, Libya, or Egypt, which overthrew either colonialism or colonial stooge governments and monarchies, right? But at the same time, yeah, it's not inherently woke. But is that messaging today, especially in the context of Israel-Palestine, is that woke to conservatives? Yes, it is. But I want to contrast, Herbert and Villeneuve together and just talk about how him being left-wing and adapting this from a left-wing point of view has made it, a movie that's more woke. So Empire Story about this when it came out said, Oscar Isaac's quotes about it. For Isaac, the relevance of Dune with its anti-capitalist and environmentalist themes felt clear. It's about the destiny of a people and the different way that cultures have dominated other ones. He said, how do a people respond when it's at the tipping point, when enough is enough, when they're exploited? All those things are things we're seeing around the world right now. Of course, pretty vague. I don't know, what you'd expect from someone like Oscar Isaac to be more specific. But yeah, it's pretty clear Dune has a lot of contemporary parallels. Now, in a Hollywood Reporter article in 2021, they interviewed the cast and crew. So over the decades after its publication, Dune arguably became the world's best-selling sci-fi novel of all time, but it's also accrued a mystique of being potentially unadaptable. The story's world was simply too big, its thematic concerns too complex to boil down into a commercial movie. As Villeneuve excitedly describes it, there are so many layers: a coming-of-age story, critiques of colonialism and capitalism, a philosophy of nature as a religion, a love story, a Shakespearean court drama, planetary ecology, and a warning about the saviour complex. And another quote later on, he says, the book was written in the 20th century. It was a distant portrait of the reality of oil and capitalism and the exploitation and over-exploitation of the earth. I mean, if a director is saying this, and then we know he's left-wing anyway from his other movies, and then it's pretty clear the movies do have this left-wing message, I don't think it's a stretch to say that him adapting Dune on the surface has attempted to make it more leftist than it originally was, and that is very funny considering conservatives are eating this stuff up so much, and conservative YouTubers who are completely brain-rotted by hysterical anti-wokeness don't really seem to care or don't realise. Now, Villeneuve actually made a movie about the Lebanese civil war back in 2010. And also, this is interesting, he was actually going to make a movie about Gaza in 2012, which he never made. So it said he was working on adapting comic artist and journalist Joe Sacco's Footnotes in Gaza for film. And a producer saying, it took a long time for us to convince Joe we were the right people to adapt it. Joe was always adamant that it was important to him to have confidence in the director. From the beginning, we had Denis in mind. Footnotes in Gaza, Sacco delves into 2 mass killings of Palestinian civilians that took place in 1956. He juxtaposes the pair of forgotten tragedies against contemporary life in Gaza. The Maltese-American cartoonist and journalist is renowned for his illustrated explorations of conflict, including his celebrated graphic novels Palestine, and this production company had also produced the Motorcycle Diaries about Che Guevara. I mean, if it wasn't clear with Blade Runner, Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2, it's pretty clear that Denis is also like a left-wing filmmaker who has an interest in the Middle East and has an interest in like anti-colonial struggle in the Middle East and bringing to light cultures and voices that don't get heard as much. And yeah, you'd imagine he's pretty sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. And if you listen to what he's just said, and then you watch Dune Part 2, and you see the Fremen running around with rocket launchers, and you see the power of the Harkonnen in response, and you want to read into it what you will, maybe that is deliberate. Again, he might not say it, because can you really say these things and become a massive Hollywood director these days? Because how many explicit, like, anti-colonialists, people who are anti-Israel, like have massive platforms making these massive studio movies? Maybe he wouldn't do that, but again, I think it's pretty clear for his visual language and for his history and for his comments on what Dune is. So he comes at it from that point of view, and he adapts it from a guy who had very weird politics. And it's kind of like with Cyberpunk with Mike Pondsmith and CD Projekt Red, because people all show me this quote from The Tabletop, which was like criticizing identity politics. And people somehow think that's relevant to the game, where it has like identity politics, where you can be transgender, where there's transgender characters, where you can have gay relationships. It feels similar with this, because I'm sure people will be like, oh, well, Frank Herbert was like a Richard Nixon supporter, therefore Dune isn't woke. But again, when you take what he said and then adapt it with a left-wing perspective, it becomes more left-wing, doesn't it? So an article by The Jacobin, by Chris Dye, what draws us to the reactionary darkness of Dune, and I want to talk about Frank Herbert's politics. So his grandparents and parents are part of the Eugene Debs era cooperative socialist movement. Herbert himself, however, rejected this collectivist politics in favour of a macho and conservative individualism. In his 30s, he worked for a series of Republican politicians and candidates and became increasingly anti-government. After its publication, Dune nonetheless became popular among a set of leftist student hippies, but Herbert himself was never part nor related to this layer. For example, one of his influences while writing the novel was S.I. Hayakawa, a semantics academic. California Governor Ronald Reagan specifically appointed Hayakawa president of the San Francisco State University to break a strike led by the Third World Liberation Front, the Black Student Union, and the American Federation of Teachers. Hayakawa and Herbert got along really well, and Herbert was invited to help weaken the strike by conducting writing seminars in 1968, and he readily agreed. He worked as a Vietnam War correspondent, and he was opposed to the war, but he was also a vocal supporter of Richard Nixon. This wasn't as counterintuitive as it may sound. His main political conviction was that governments lie. He perversely argued that the president's crimes were helpful in that they would convince Americans to trust the government less. He was no friend to anti-colonial liberation struggles. He was preoccupied with Native American culture and suffering, but even this was filtered through what his family called his self-conception as a great white expert. In Herbert's mind, the indigenous angel of vengeance was less about radical equality and more of a divine judgment on the decadence of white government and society. Baron Harkonnen is actually gay in the book, and just right here saying, almost all the series' collectives are delusional. Its political saviors, great villains in disguise. Its indigenous peoples, a divine punishment for cartoonish white gay elites, but the tone is also slippery. And then another article, Frank Herbert, the Republican Salafist, by Harris A. Durrani. It just talks more about his views on Islam. It's a very, very long read, but I thought there was some interesting things about his politics here. So his politics are partly explained by his involvement with the Republican Party. Thin accounts of his beliefs cover up distinctions between left and right criticisms of legalism and liberalism. They undercut the depth of Herbert's engagement with non-Western traditions. Taking his ideology seriously offers a more precise, if also more uncomfortable explanation of how he leaned right. It also exposes the American right's troublesome alignments with Islamic thought. Ultimately, Herbert explored non-Western traditions not as objects of political critique, but rather as positive expressions of his politics. Herbert may have imposed his Orientalist romanticism onto his conservative understanding of American values. In 1982, he praised Reagan for keeping that dream of the idealized American firmly in mind, seeking to restore the individual to his preeminent position in society. According to Herbert's son, Brian, he disliked McCarthyism because it endangered the central freedoms of the American people, particularly the constitutional right of individuals. If the Dune novel sought to restore an essential non-Western tradition, Herbert also wanted to restore an essential American one. So Herbert decried 1960s protesters as prone to self-gratulation and hero worship. He immediately added, I don't think there's a fucking bit of difference between a bureaucracy that is instituted by a democratic regime, a state socialist regime, a communist regime, or a capitalist regime. Was he skeptical of black and brown activists or of white liberals? In this context, it's intriguing because he advocated decriminalizing drugs during a period when drug policy was highly racialized. He also remained optimistic about Jimmy Carter, praising him for reversing course after an erroneous appeal to ethnic purity. Later, Reagan's foreign policy scared the shit out of Herbert because of the US intervention in Afghanistan. So when I read stuff like that, it just reminds me of like Philip K. Dick. It seems like all sci-fi writers from the 1960s had like really, really bizarre politics. And also, I guess it was a time where politics didn't fit so neatly into the boxes of like left and right, because like that was saying, like, what is he actually criticizing with some of these comments? Is he criticizing liberalism? Is he criticizing like leftism and socialism? Is he criticizing conservatism? It's pretty clear these people like Philip K. Dick and Herbert, they just have like very strong opinions, which, you know, just are all over the political spectrum, which makes it interesting for someone like a leftist to come at his work and be like, well, it's very clear what he's saying here, even though he might not have necessarily believed it. But he did something interesting there as well, which flared something up in my mind. I made a video recently about how American conservatives suddenly like love Islam because they view it as conservative. He was kind of doing that before it was cool. He did have a lot of respect for different Islamic cultures and Arab cultures and stuff. It's also there, some of his conservatism was reflected in how much he liked them, because Islamist revolutionaries, not so much, you know, more secular ones or leftist Muslim ones, they were more traditional. And he liked that conservatism. But at the same time, with like Islamicism generally, it's not as focused on the individual so much as like American capitalism. So yeah, it had a lot of like very, very bizarre politics. But like I said, if you're going to come at me saying, well, Dune's anti-woke because this guy was a conservative, again, someone is adapting his work and putting their own like 2020s spin on it, and they come from a left-wing perspective. And Denis is also interested in Palestine, Lebanon, the Middle East, but in a different way. So that is it for the video. Conservatives who politicize everything seemingly have nothing to say about the very apparent politics of Dune. Don't praise it, don't criticize it. Apparently the only woke thing is about Chani, and that's it. Again, I don't think they understand subtext in any form. But that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.